So I was reminded that 2 weeks ago we finished chapter 20, so we are ready for 21. I'll make sure that there's no questions about anything else before we hop into it. Then my first paragraph is 1 through 9. So let's see how it goes. And the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the priests, the son of Aaron, and say to them, no one shall make himself unclean for the dead among his people, except for his closest relatives, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brothers, or his virgin sister who is near to him because she has had no husband. For her he may make himself unclean. He shall not make himself unclean as a husband among his people, and so profane himself. They shall not make bald patches on their heads, nor shave off the edge of their beards, nor make any cuts on their body. They shall be holy to their God, not profane the name of the Lord. For they offer the worst food offerings, the bread of their God. Therefore they shall be holy. They shall not marry a prostitute or a woman who has been defiled. Neither shall they marry a woman divorced from her husband. The priest is holy to the Lord, to his God. You shall sanctify him, for he offers the bread of your God. He shall be holy to you, for I, the Lord, sanctify you, am holy. And the daughter of any priest, if she profanes herself by whoring, profanes her father, she shall be burned with fire. Oh, nice, right? And so it's kind of okay. So what do you think? What do you notice? Questions? Yeah. Changing even is associated with people that they're saying should be burned. So let's handle that question too. One, why does this change liturgy? But two, why is it here now? Because that's what the people in that land were doing. A big chunk of this, remember, is exactly that. A lot of these worship practices, God is saying, don't do like the people of the land where you're going, and don't do like the Egyptians of where you came from. But the other side of that is, I think that there's a level of superstition within people, right? I mean, when you say that as a whole, people are superstitious. And how often have we, even in America, had a discussion about whether or not the immoral person is still a good politician, or a good mayor, or a good police officer, or a good firefighter? Do morals always equate to them being able to do their job or not? Not always. But yet, we have a tendency to want to say if someone has had a moral failure, they're no longer fit to lead, right? Well, what happens if you have a moral failure amongst somebody who is supposed to be a moral leader? Does that mean that everything that they've done is no longer valid? Not necessarily, but for many people, there's a question. I mean, think of what we've seen over the last 30 years of priests who've been found guilty of different things, pastors who've been found guilty, and how it ruins people's understanding of the church and faith. So part of what's going on here, I think, is one could say, don't do what the people of the land have to do. But two is trying to help them understand that the people that they're going to, their job is to be a mediator between them and God. And God doesn't want them to feel like there's any question about what they did and its validity. That make sense? Now, coming to the New Testament, and actually in the early church history, but 200 or 300 years, there was what's called the Donatists. And what they said is, if the priest or the pastor or the spiritual leader of the community was not holy, then if people took communion from that person, they didn't receive the grace of God. Does necessarily the person who is bringing the elements, the person who is leading the body and doing this religious act, does their morality affect the effectiveness of the act? It was a big controversy. And we've seen it kind of playing out in our culture, right? The reality is we understand that faith, while worked out in a group, right? We've learned over the last 2 years, we need each other to really be able to do this the way it's going to be done, right? I can't do it on our own. It's still also an individual decision with an individual relationship between you and God, correct? It's kind of a both and. So if the act of, say, being baptized or taking communion is an individual act done corporately, does it really matter about the person who's leading in front? Whether they are right, wrong, corrupt, good, holy, does that change things? And what Jesus would say is, and throughout the Gospels, if you've been doing the daily readings Bible a year, we've seen a lot of parables where he's like, it's what's on the inside of the individual that makes them up. Not what other people do to them, not what other people say to them. But at this, so in the New Testament and for us as Christians, we would say, your holiness is based on your actions, right? Your faith is an individual reality. Now, your brothers and sisters, your spouse, your family, all of us, we can help encourage you to do the right thing, and we can help keep you on the right path. But here, God is setting a precedent and trying to help them understand that they are to not be like the people around them. And so, as much as they are to be different from the people around them, the priesthood is to be different from the general people of Israel to set the standard. And they've already shown, remember, this is all put down. We're still like less than 2 or 3 days after Nadab and Abihu just did it wrong. Remember that? All of this teaching is still within probably that first week of them getting a little tipsy and taking the fire and going to put stuff on the altar of incense. They're not supposed to, and they're not supposed to because they weren't there yet. And they end up killing them. God lashed out, and they burned themselves up. They had too much alcohol. However it happened, the people are realizing that we really need the people who are leading us to give us the best possible example. And even though, as Christians, we say it's an individual thing, pastors, spiritual leaders, I'm no different than you on an individual basis. But within the body, I'm held to a higher standard because I'm setting the pace. Does that make sense? Samuel's no different than Mindy, no different than no different than Gary, no different than Steve. On an individual basis, I'm no different. But within this context right now, I'm the teacher, and therefore I am held to a higher standard. Because if I lead you guys wrong, I'm not the only one who suffers. Right? Because if I teach you guys wrong and you start to lead wrong, and I lead you down the wrong path. And so for the people at this point, he's not saying priests do more than what is required to show that you're doing what I require. It's better to go above and beyond and prove it than to do just enough. We all know those people who do only what's required, and exactly what's required, and nothing more, right? And doesn't it make you question everything else that they do? You get what I'm saying? To kind of get what picture is painted here? Any other thoughts or questions on this? Makes you grateful for the time in which we live when you think back to, you know, prior to the Reformation, when you didn't even know you couldn't read the Bible because it wasn't a language you could read. You didn't know whether you were doing things right because you just had to accept what the person was telling you. And if that person was manipulative, hey, if I tell these people this, I'm going to get money, I'm going to get whatever I want. Yeah. We are truly blessed to be a part of what I would say is less than 3% of the world's population across time that can read and write. We are incredibly blessed to be probably less than 0.1% of the population across history who's had God's word in our hand. And not just a single copy of God's word. The average American household, I think they said, has 3 Bibles in it for every person. I don't know that that's true, but I mean, my goodness, my house by itself. I think when we moved up here, we had 42 Bibles, and that doesn't include the 3 that I've got since we've come here. So we're up to 45, and now we're down to just 2 people in the house. So we're making up for the rest of you. But we are blessed. Oh, yeah. It doesn't even account for digital. If you count digital, I mean, YouVersion, how many of you download YouVersion app? You've officially got like 300 different Bibles in different languages and translations, just in the palm of your hand. But before we had this access, before we had this level of learning and knowledge, the integrity of the leadership is still important, but it's less vital. Does that make sense? What you thinking?
I don't think by the Catholic law it is. That's what I thought.
Well, and that's a prime example of where the lack of integrity wears away at all of their integrity. Even though most of the priests I've interacted with in 20 years have been incredibly, phenomenally wonderful spiritual men. But it only takes one, and it ruins it for everybody. And so what God is saying here, priests, hold yourself to a much higher standard. You are the human embodiment of holiness to a people who are supposed to be holy. It's not that they're not going to have failures, they will. But their job is to, more than any other group of people, keep them at a minimum because they're the example of everybody else. And that's part of the reason why you guys have seen me over the last 2.5 years. I got to a place where I messed something up. I just confess it. I don't let it sit. And there's probably some leaders in the church and people in church who wish I would. But I'd much rather deal with it and get it out of it. Gary, I told them beforehand, I'm going to talk about shift between pastors and Sunday. So staff parish might not all be happy I'm sharing all the details, but if it's a good sermon,
Oh,
it's I'm an open book. You guys not noticed this over the last 2.5 years? And that's just the way I have it. It's the only way that I can be a man of integrity. Be as open and honest as I can. And I think that that's what God's getting at here. Any other thoughts? Any of the specific things that they're talking about, we want to ask about why God's making that a rule? I do want to point out something. He says for priests, they are not to marry a divorced woman. For priests. What does that imply? For those who are not priests, it's okay to marry somebody who's been divorced. Does it not? How many of you have heard in the church that somebody who gets divorced is no longer allowed to get any form of leadership or should be shunned, or
Yeah.
you've seen it, right? It's becoming less, but it's still there. We look down. We tend to, as a society, look down on those, especially those who get divorced over and over. But we also sometimes question those who marry someone. Do we not? Yet this right here is just saying, for the sake of the priesthood, don't do this so there's no question. But for everybody else, God is saying it's perfectly okay.
I remember we had the first sermon, and it didn't come across that only the priest couldn't marry a divorced woman. And I was so uncomfortable because a lot of our membership were divorced. That really made me uncomfortable, but I do remember that sermon.
So let me be clear about a couple things. Talking about divorce. Divorce is a sin. It is. Scripture is very clear. It says, now, oftentimes divorce is the far less volatile sin, far less widespread sin. Because sometimes to stay in a relationship causes far more sin to happen. But what do we know about sin? All sin was paid for on the cross. And therefore, if we commit a sin, we ask for forgiveness, God is faithful and just, and He will forgive our sins. Right? That doesn't diminish the sin that happens when a marriage falls apart. I don't want to diminish that. God hates it. So I believe God never wants to see divorce ever happen. But I'm also pretty sure God hates death, and we sinned, and therefore death is in the world, and it's just a part of life. Jesus said in the Gospels, Moses permitted divorce because of the hardness of your heart. It's because we are broken people, and because we're broken people, we do broken things, and because we do broken things, it causes broken relationships, right? But that doesn't mean it's not redeemable. And as Dean pointed out, in the New Testament, while we're still supposed to hold ourselves to the highest version of holiness, there is still redemption.
And again, when you go back to the question of who's it protecting, women had a very different role back then than they do today.
Absolutely.
Had a very hard time taking it on their own.
Yep.
They had to rely on
People who are willing to marry them, even though they might be seen as dangerous. Now, the other thing I would point out here, and this is my personal speculation, I'm going to say that up front. If a priest were to marry a divorced woman, or even someone who is a prostitute, because it talks about that, right? They may not be allowed to be a priest anymore. Does that mean that they're not a Levite? Because aren't all priests Levites? But not all Levites are priests, right? But all Levites still work for God, still work for the tabernacle and temple, and still receive their needs from their work in the tabernacle and temple. So this is the same kind of speculation. If a priest were to marry a woman, they may not be able to be a priest anymore, but that doesn't mean they stop working. Doesn't mean that God still doesn't care of them. They just wouldn't function as priests. They function as a Levite. As we discussed, Levites were the bankers, and Levites were the operators of the food pantry, and the Levites were the doorkeepers, and the Levites were the singers, and the Levites on and on and on and on and on. And we don't see anything that says they can't do those things. You get what I'm saying? What you think, Gary? I heard
Well,
that.
if they're not a priest, in what I'm thinking is that, yes, yeah, what it would be is still Levites,
Right.
but being a priest, you're more influential in your position and your actions, what you say. And that was,
No, absolutely. You guys were there. Amy and Mark and Kathy, Susan, Steve were there, and I don't know if they all heard. But one of the things I said to our conference last weekend is, those of us who are called to become clergy, priests are a form of clergy, correct? Those of us who are called to be clergy, for most of my life, I was always told it's. I don't believe so. I think to be a clergy person is a lower call. As a lay person, you guys can do whatever you want to serve God, right? You can go wherever you want, you can do whatever you want, you can be involved in whatever ministries you want to be involved in. But because I accepted a call to be a leader, it narrows the field of what I'm allowed to do. And the higher the role of leadership, the smaller the field of what I get to do. Scott, who I'm following, he doesn't get to preach every Sunday anymore, because now he's almost like a dignitary that has to go around to the 4 states and build relationships and help hold everything together. And so many of the things that he got to do as a local church pastor, he doesn't get to do anymore. What I do, and what I have the choice of, all of you guys can teach, but I really am required to teach. They ask the questions of all those people being ordained. Will you teach the word to the house? Will you teach it to the children? Will you make sure that the children are educated, the people are educated? So when you move into a role of spiritual leadership, it's a smaller field of focus. It's a lower calling. It's a more specialized calling. So, yeah, you're right. They've got less influence. But that doesn't mean that they're less. But we're still leaders. You're still leaders. Many of you guys are stepping in leadership here. But as a lay person, let's say you said yes to being the chair of council, right? I would say But let's say you try it for 6 months and you're like, no, guys, realistically, I can do this. My skill set, my gift set does allow me to do this way it needs to be done. Can you step back from that? You could, and you could go back to doing what you're doing with technology and worship and the other things that you've been involved in. And nobody, they might question it, but you can do that. You're free to do that. If I just say, guys, I really don't like preaching, I'm not going to preach anymore. Are you guys still going to pay me to be your preacher? If I say I'm never going to preach again? You see what I'm saying? There's a difference between being a lay leader and being a member of the clergy. And so what I think God is saying here is to these priests who are the leaders amongst the Levites, and the Levites are leaders amongst the people, is that you are held to a higher standard. And if you step out of that higher standard, you move on to the next calling. And we might say it's the next calling down, but I think it's the next calling back up, because it opens up their options. If they're a priest, their only job is to be in the temple, to receive the sacrifices, to offer the sacrifices, to offer the offerings of the incense, and that's it. That's all the priests got to do. The Levites got to do all the other things. Yeah, some people say, yeah, but you want to be the priest. Well, who here thinks being a butcher is a great deal? Anybody? The irony is, most of the time from the time I was talking butcher. I don't know why, but I was at it. If you don't like being a minister, you don't want to be a priest. You get what I'm saying? So even with this notion of marrying a divorced woman, God's saying, okay, so you won't be the person in the front offering the sacrifices, because those are holy, and they are meant to be holy, and everyone who sends brings their offering does not want or need to question whether or not their sacrifice is going to be accepted. Again, that's the Samuel Paget interpretation. Reading what is said there, and then reading what that implies about what it's not.
Then it would be okay for him to marry her.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Next paragraph, 10 through 15. The priest who is chief among his brothers, on whose head the anointing oil is poured, and who has been consecrated to wear the garments, shall not let the hair on his head hang loose, nor tear his clothes. He shall not go into any dead body. He shall not go into any dead bodies, nor make himself unclean, even for his father or his mother. He shall not go out of the sanctuary, lest he profane the sanctuary of his God. For the consecration of the anointing oil is of his God is on him. I am the Lord. And he shall take a wife in her virginity, of a widow or a divorced woman or a woman who has been defiled, or a prostitute. These he shall not marry, but he shall take as his wife a virgin of his own people, that he may not profane his offspring among his people. For I am the Lord who sanctifies him.
This is the head God.
The head God. I know you just asked that question. When,
But because if you step up, you can't.
that's the way I'm reading this.
Yeah.
This is the high priest. This is the highest religious official within the body. They're the only one who's allowed to go in the Holy of Holies. And they only go in the Holy of Holies once a year. Go for it.
No, I just said, oh, back then the priests get married, when did that shit? So was that a old thing?
So, Samuel Paget's interpretation. No. It's just, two things. Paul says, when you're serving the church, it's better for you to be single than married. Because as a single person, you can devote your entire life to the work of the kingdom. Whereas a married person, necessarily part of your allegiance, part of your time, part of your need to accomplish things is geared towards your spouse and your family. So Paul is saying very clearly amongst the leaders of the church, it's better for them to be single, but it's not a requirement. Okay? In the Catholic Church, like any organization that's around for any length of time, there have been a number of people in leadership who've been just a little corrupt. Trying to be as kind as possible. In fact, it was very, very brief history of this. The bubonic plague, the Black Death, right? You guys all remember hearing about that in world history. Killed a third of the people throughout Europe. All of Europe. 1 out of every 3 people was killed by the bubonic. Tragic, right? It killed 9 out of every 10 priests in the church. Because the priest's job was to go in and offer the last rites. When they came out of the Black Death, it has been shown that the Catholic Church was in desperate need of priests. And they lowered the standard a little bit on who could be priests. It created a series of over 300 years where there there's rampant corruption amongst the priesthood, because normally they would have kicked these people out. But now it's, we need someone to be a priest. The rule for celibacy was not fully in place at this point. So what came out of this is, even amongst the good priests, it was very common for them to promote their children into higher places. And even if they were good, there was still corruption. So the Pope said that because Paul said it's better for priests to be single, which is true, they just said we're going to make all of them be single, because therefore there is no notion of they're going to give their kids special treatment. There is no notion of they need to worry about the Pope's wife, or the priest's wife, or the bishop's wife, because they're not there, they don't exist. It solved a lot of problems for them, and they used a convenient verse to make it. You get what I'm saying?
Which could be changed back at any time.
Which could be changed back, and they're actually talking right now, which there's some of these things I don't agree with, but the one thing that I'm intrigued by is they're discussing female priests right now. I don't personally have a problem with it, but I hope that that's not just a slippery slope for everything else they're discussing. They're doing the same things the United Church doing. So. But I think realistically it was pragmatic, and it was also seeking to follow Paul's suggestion. Not a requirement, a suggestion.
You know, what era, year, about this time, would you say that was happening?
I think 1300 sounds about right. Or 1500s.
Because that kind of bring the Reformation up.
It's one of many reasons. When did the bubonic plague happen? 1346 to 1353.
You were on here, weren't you?
But I'm not saying that there wasn't corruption before. I'm not saying that it was bad. They had to open the door because they needed this. They necessarily lowered the bar and created a situation where things just.
Or Lutheran priests or pastor, what are they called? Can they marry?
Yeah. Martin Luther was a priest and a monk in the Catholic Church. And after he was excommunicated and he realized this was a rule that was made up pragmatically, but realistically, it was, in his mind, it was an overreach of what the Pope and the Catholic Church allowed. He opened marriage back up. And at the end of his life, he actually ended up marrying a woman who was a nun. And then they served together. Remember her name. Too much time has gone by since I read that. So the high priest has a higher standard yet because he's the
So he pretty much has to marry.
Yeah, for the record, I've got two, if I was the high priest, I've got two sons. For Blake, it's important that he does everything like this. The next one. Grant? So again, and the interesting thing is we've seen this play out in recent history. I don't know if very many of you have studied English history over the last 100 years, but you know, the queen who just passed away, she should not have been queen. Her dad was never meant to be king because her uncle was king, but he abdicated the throne and her dad got elevated. Because he wanted to marry somebody he shouldn't have. Divorced and from a and not of anything, not of no good works. So she had a bunch of strikes against her. I'm not saying that right or wrong here, but it's a reality of leadership. We just hold them to different standards.
But yeah, you know, King Charles.
And almost everybody has said that it's questionable about whether he's going to be a good leader because he's not necessarily always shown himself to be a good leader. He's not followed the rules as much, and he's made questionable moral decisions, and so therefore. So you get what I'm saying? I'm not saying it makes it right, but God is saying if you are a leader, you're held to a higher standard. And if you are the leader of the leaders, you really need to just toe the straight and narrow so there's no questions asked. Don't bring shame upon God and his work. And again, what it doesn't say is if you're a priest and if you're selected to be the high priest and you want to marry somebody who doesn't fit the bill, you just need to understand you're going to give up your ability to be high priest by doing something else. I think God is saying, don't do that. But you need to understand what it is that you're giving up. Make sense? All right, next paragraph, 16 through the end of the chapter. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron, saying, none of your offspring throughout their generations who has a blemish may approach to offer the bread of his God. For no one who has a blemish shall draw near, a man blind or lame, or one who has a mutilated face, or a limb too long, or a man who has an injured foot, or an injured hand, or a hunchback, or a dwarf of a man with a defect in his sight, or an itching disease, or scabs, or crushed testicles. No man of the offspring of Aaron the priest who has a blemish shall come near to offer the Lord's food offerings. Since he has a blemish, he shall not come near to offer the bread of his God. He may eat the bread of his God, both of the most holy and the holy things, but he shall not go through the veil, approach the altar, because he has a blemish, that he may not profane my sanctuaries, for I am the Lord who sanctifies them. So Moses spoke to Aaron and his sons and to all the people of Israel. Right.
Back to the perception.
I think that this is a sad part of the reality of the human nature. It is about perception. Now, the interesting thing about this, since you've been bringing it up a couple times tonight, is when we come to the New Testament, what does Jesus do? He hangs out with these people and he restores them. He actually makes it right. Another man's crippled hand, he heals the hand. A man who's got leprosy, he heals them. Guy who's blind, he heals them. There's a difference between the pragmatic side of what God says here and the heart of what Christ shows us God wants to do. You get what I'm saying with that?
I guess I'm confused because a lot of these things that you're saying don't allow, people are born that. So you can't help them, that's how they are.
But notice he doesn't say, I'm not going to take care of it. He doesn't say, throw them out like they would like any other world. As soon as I said that, I thought of, do you guys remember a couple of years, just before COVID, it had made fairly big international news that was it Sweden or Norway that had eliminated Down syndrome? I think it's Sweden. They didn't eliminate Down syndrome by curing it. They eliminated Down syndrome because they didn't allow people to have symptoms. God is not saying because you are born imperfect, you should be destroyed. God is not saying because you're born imperfect and have a defect or you get a disease that we should kick you out of the community. God is simply saying for those who serve in this role, you can't have these things. But I will still. Because again, it's about perception. And let's face it, as human beings, perception is almost worse than the truth, isn't it? We will allege people who we think are guilty before it's ever proven that they're guilty. Not saying it's right. So if we ask the question of who is this protecting, right? In many ways, God is protecting those who are born with a defect, who do have this situation. Saying, yeah, no, you can't serve in this capacity. That you're not kicked out of the family and you are still allowed to eat the holy things, just like everybody else in the family. Any other thoughts or questions?
Kind of like their sacrifice themselves,
Hmm.
because, I mean, even when they had to bring their sacrifice to the temple, it couldn't be blemished, it couldn't be, it had to be perfect.
Yeah. So in some ways, this is, again, an image to the world of what God is asking for them to bring and how they are to participate. And we only hear the part about there being virtuous.
They're not any less of a person.
Not less of a person.
Why can't they do what the rest? I don't can't comprehend. Just because I have one of these disabilities or
Okay. So I'm going to ask a different question. Do you remember in the New Testament where there in John's Gospel, there's a man who's born blind? And they go, and the disciples ask him, who sinned, him or his parents? He's blind, so therefore someone must have sinned. That doesn't make that question right. We now know that's a completely invalid question. But Jesus says, he doesn't tell them, you guys are stupid. He says, it's not him nor his parents who sinned. This man was born blind so that God might. He heals the man. And John's gospel spends a whole chapter with the Pharisees and the Sadducees trying to figure out how this man who was born blind could see and talk to his parents and trying to figure out, you're lying to us. He was born blind, right? Because for them, those deformities, because of sin. Can sinners eat the holy bread? It was meant for those who were consecrated to the family, right? Now, women weren't allowed to go in to the temple and offer the sacrifices. They could eat them. In some ways, God is starting to peel back the superstitions of the people. He's just not going all the way to where he will in the New Testament. Does that make sense? Remember, we have to realize where they're at and what the world did with people who were less than. They would literally kill them. Okay? Sorry, you got a gimpy hand. You're not going to be good for the family farm. We're going to toss this baby out now because let's just not even worry about them growing up to the point where we just have to take care of them. That's not what I'm saying, is it? And for the record, having a gimpy hand does not change the fact that whether or not you can preach the gospel. I know you guys watched the shows, and you too have watched it. And some of the rest of it. This last week, the episode with little James. You know, he's not normal. He's got a bum leg of some kind. Just hobbles along. And he goes to Jesus finally after 3 seasons of wondering why in the world this developed. And he asks him, why haven't you healed me? He goes, I can heal you. Can you imagine the story it tells that you, a man who is not healed, was one who is healing others in my name? What testimony that brings. Now, that, of course, is extra good. It's not in the Gospels, but I think it absolutely rings true to the heart of God that we've seen for the last 3 books, right? There's the reality of dealing with the world that they're in and making sure that they present themselves as a holy and set apart people. And there's the trajectory of where he's leading them to where ultimately we see in Christ.
That reminds me of a little encouragement I was reading something. So, you know, we have our garden, what if farmers spread to help get a beneficial crop? You know? And it was based on that we sometimes have to have crap thrown at us in order to stretch and grow. And that is exactly what you're saying, sometimes you have to go through, gosh, I can see that pain to grow.
The pain, the heartache, the hardships, all of those things are what strengthen us to be able to handle what God will allow us to do for Him later. Doesn't mean that God likes it. It doesn't mean that God wants it. But God does allow it because He knows He can use it for us. Fair enough? But yeah, like you said, Tim, He's not saying that they're less of people. He's just acknowledging the. Can you imagine what the world around him might say if the high priest was gimpy with a gimpy arm? They'd probably want to take them all out. Your God definitely is not holy. What God's saying is they're not less person. It's just because of what this role requires.
Think though, how many parents that end up with a child like that, they're just gonna jump on the steps of the temple and say, all right, we're gonna take them.
It's happened all
Taking
throughout
care of
human history. And what God is saying here is take care of them. Even though they can't do this. And then by the New Testament, Jesus starts curing those things. Reverse. Oh no, you were not allowed to do this, but we'll fix that. I've got a great handles. Here you can see. That's what God wants to do. We have a God who wants to heal. It's just not always the best thing to heal. You know that. I mean, my goodness, you guys have walked that for the last 3 years. There's so many things you wish were different. But by the same token, some of what you've experienced because of that tragedy has brought so many other people good. And I don't know that you remember, but I've told the same thing about the death of my mom. I was 20 years old. And she was just getting started. She had 2 young boys. But if my mother hadn't died, my stepmother would have never found us. She would have never been able to help all the youth that she helped. The guy who didn't kill my mother would have never got his act cleaned up and would just continue to be a drunk. He never would have given his life to Christ, and he never would have become a Gideon, and he never would have helped the 35 other Gideons become Gideons. And you think of all of the Bibles that they passed out on the people they brought to Christ, and God brought good out. Did God want that my mom to die? But God brought good out of it. And God will always bring good out of misfortunes. There's just certain things within the leadership of the body that we have to say, this is not allowed. Any other thoughts? Next paragraph.
Makes me think though,
Go ahead.
or
Go for it.
that I mean, none of us were in the temple when all this was going on. You don't know what physical demands God put on the priests going into the temple. I mean, some of the Gideon could have done, held up, the bread for so long, or, stood for so long, or
I
what.
can hold up the right thigh of a sheep fairly easy. It's a weight line, right? Anybody want to try and weigh the right thigh of a cow? That requires a certain level of strength. I probably will not be very good at it because I don't have a lot of upper body strength. Legs, I can push for days. When I was a lineman in high school, I could leg press almost 800 pounds. But I never got higher than 145 on bench. Just didn't happen. So you're right, there are some aspects of just the raw necessity of the job where they wouldn't be able to. You're a fireman, there's how much they gotta carry.
Lot more leeway.
Right. And if you can't do it, you're not just putting yourself in danger, you're putting all those people that you're trying to save in danger.
That's what we did. That was part of the agility, the camera part. Was to show what strength he had. He had the legs, he had the arms, and he had it here.
Someone goes to wave that right thigh of the cow and they fall into the fire and now what, guess what? Anyway, we're way down. Let's come on. We don't think about who God is protecting by saying, if you can't do these things, you shouldn't do them. Right? 22, 1 through 9. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons, so that they abstain from the holy things of the people of Israel, which they dedicate to me, so that they do not profane my holy name. And the Lord, say to them, if any one of all of your offspring throughout your generations approaches the holy things that the people of Israel dedicate to the Lord, while he is an uncleanness, that person shall be cut off from my presence, the Lord. None of the offspring of Aaron who has a leprous disease or discharge may eat of the holy things until he is clean. Whoever touches anything that is unclean through contact with the dead, or a man who has had an emission of semen, and whoever touches the swarming thing by which he may be made unclean, or a person from whom he may take uncleanness, whatever his uncleanness may be, the person who touches such a thing shall be unclean until the evening, shall not eat of the holy things until he has bathed his body in water. When the sun goes down, he shall be clean, and afterwards he may eat the holy things, because they are his food. He shall not eat what dies of itself or is torn by beasts, and so make himself unclean by it. I am the Lord. They shall therefore keep my charge, lest they bear sin for it, and die thereby when they profane it. I am the Lord who sent the swarming things that they're talking about are oftentimes the things you find around the dead. Yeah. The point of this is, if you are and you find yourself now coming in contact with that which is unclean or unholy, don't go back and do your priestly tasks. Take the time, follow the rituals of cleansing, get yourself right, come back. The interesting thing is, in the New Testament, Jesus takes this to another level. Where he says, when you come to offer your offering, if you find that you've got something against your brother in your heart, an uncleanness of the heart, go and make yourself clean. So then come back. Jesus takes it to another level. It's not just about outward uncleanness. It's more about the inward uncleanness. They finally got the outward uncleanness. Unfortunately, the Pharisees and Sadducees, they took it a little too far. Any other thoughts? Do something unclean, but it can pay. Yeah, you're gonna do something unclean, do it towards the end of the day, so you don't have to, or unless you're just really lazy, then you do it first thing. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I can't go to the tabernacle today, I'm just a dead animal. Of course, you also don't get to eat the food. That was a little sacrilegious. But yeah. Anything else? Next paragraph, 10 through 16. A lay person shall not eat of a holy thing, nor a foreign guest of the priest or hired worker shall eat of a holy thing. But if a priest buys a slave as a property for money, the slave may eat of it, and anyone born in his house may eat of his food. Priest's daughter marries a layman, she shall not eat of the contribution of the holy things, but if the priest's daughter is widowed or divorced, and the child returns to her father's house, as in her youth, she may eat of her father's food. Yet no lay person shall eat of it, and if anyone eats of the holy thing unintentionally, he shall add the fifth of its value to it, and give the holy thing to the priest. They shall not profane the holy things of the people of Israel, which they contribute to the Lord, and so cause them to bear iniquity and guilt by eating their holy things, for I am the Lord who sanctifies them. Anything? Okay, I can see your wheels turning. What you think? Right? Yeah. I saw your pensive look like you were processing it, so I thought you had a thought there. Oh, hasn't got that yet. Well, a lot of guidelines, and sometimes for us, they feel over the top. But again, it's trying to make sure that the people who are bringing their gifts always feel like everything is right.
So the high priest had to keep all this.
Yes. But there's a key difference. If you were the son of the high priest, you wouldn't learn anything else but this. I mean, you're not going to be out in the fields taking care of sheep. You're not going to be concerned about planting grain and being a farmer. You're going to learn the family business. And so while it feels like a lot, I mean, take an example right now. Business you own. I am an extremely amateur model role. There are things that I understand because Melissa's dad was a model railroader. He gave her a train set. And that came into our household when I married Melissa. And I learned a thing or two. I'd love to put the setup that we've got. I've got all kinds of ideas. I've done all kinds of research. But realistically, I don't know. It's not my thing right now, and I don't unfortunately have the time to be in the model. Because, oh yeah, I'm a spiritual leader. There's a lot of things that I just have to do. I don't get a choice for what I do. A lot of my I have tried to be a gardener this. You've seen my garden. Yes. It was great for the time I was able to do it. But if I for free time, it could have been wonderful. But I didn't have it. The reality is, each and every one of us make decisions and choose things that we allow ourselves to succeed in. For the high priest, yeah, this feels like a whole lot. But if it's all you've known, and it's the family you grew up in, and you watched your dad doing it, and you watched your grandpa doing it, and you've seen it happen over and over again, and they've talked about it every single day, when it's your time to step up into it, is it gonna be that big of a deal?
I think the thing I try to remember is, the culture then, the way things work. What might some guidelines look like if it was written today for people to read 1,000 years from now? It's gonna be a different time, different. So it's foreign to us. It's very foreign to us. That's one of the things about traveling that I think I'm most nervous about is that I can be very much a foreigner. So nothing's gonna feel natural and.
Well, and I think part of it is that it used to be that Dean, I, Jim, Steve, we follow our cultures. And that's not happening today.
Since the Industrial Revolution, all of a sudden we have options. But for the most part, if you were born in a farmer's family, you were gonna be a farmer. If you're born into the blacksmith family, you're gonna be a blacksmith. If you're born into the baker's family, you're gonna be a baker. It didn't really go outside of what your family heritage was. It didn't happen. And so, yeah, it's just a different culture. It's not worse than what we got. Let's be honest. One of the things that we see in our culture is many kids have too many options, so they no longer know what to do with themselves. And they end up, a lot of them, I'd say kids, but there are people my age who spent 20 years as an adult and still haven't figured out what to do with it.
I just have people still go to school.
Still going to school in their 40s because they tried something and it didn't work, and now you can't just jump into this career. You gotta have training to it. Now you gotta have a degree to go along with it. And I'm not saying, yeah, we have a lot more options, but I don't know that it's always better. It's just different. Any other thoughts?
Unless the priest's daughter can marry herself out of the family, but does the same thing. The son marrying someone who is not, part of the tribe of Levi.
So technically, it says earlier, they were supposed to marry someone from the tribe of Levi. And if they did marry outside of the tribe of Levi, they're no longer allowed to be a priest. And if they're a Levite who marries outside of the tribe of Levi. Because again, you did what your dad
He probably did that twice.
probably. Which, imagine how much that was looked down.
I was close to the big shot now and get it down here.
Could you imagine her dad? So you're part of the priestly family. Why do you come and slumming it with us? What did you do wrong? How did you get in trouble? Do I really want you married? Okay, fictitious conversation, but it's my girls. You better believe I drove Braxton. Flat out the first time he came to the house. I can do weddings and funerals. I can do one of them. It's probably not the one you want. And I know all the funeral directors in town, and they all owe me favors. And another body in the bottom of the pit, nobody asks questions.
So you didn't give him shotgun, sorry.
Oh, no, I didn't need to. My job's all about connections. I don't have to be the one to get my hands unclean and be unclean until evening. That's way up. Let's go. 17 through 25. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and his sons and all the people of Israel, and say to them, When anyone of the house of Israel or of the sojourners in Israel presents a burnt offering as his offering, for any of their vows or free will offerings that they offer to the Lord, if it is to be accepted for you, it shall be a male without blemish of the bulls or the sheep or the goats. You shall not offer anything that has a blemish, for it will not be acceptable for you. And when anyone offers a sacrifice, peace offering to the Lord to fulfill a vow, present fruit offering from the herd or the flock to be accepted, it must be perfect. Therefore, there shall be no blemish in it. Animals blind or disabled or mutilated or having a discharge or an itch or scab, you shall not offer to the Lord or give them to the Lord as a food offering on the altar. You may present a bull or a lamb that has a part too long or too short for a free will offering, but for a vow offering it can be accepted. Any animal that has its testicles bruised or crushed or torn or cut, you shall not offer to the Lord. You shall not do it within your land. Neither shall you offer as the bread of your God any such animals gotten from a foreigner, since there is a blemish in them because of their mutilation, they will not be accepted. If they
Then saying the same thing, know your best.
Bring your best.
bring your best. If it's a sacrifice, it should be a sacrifice. It shouldn't be thrown in your candy. Now, there's a nice little caveat here that if it's just a free will offering, which is just a Thanksgiving, an offering on top of your normal things, you can bring the one that might have a little bit of a deformity, so long as it's not something that's cut or mutilated or might cause someone else who's going to eat that meat to get sick. But don't bring it if you're just trying to make yourself right with God. This is the extra above and beyond offering. Make sense? Any thoughts, questions, comments? Not a lot. Now, the other side of this is we don't see shepherds much here. We don't even really see herdsmen here. The guy who I went to school with, his name is Seth Myers. He's got a herd of cattle, one of the largest in southwestern Indiana. But outside of him, we know some people who might raise a dozen cattle, a couple dozen cattle. It's really hard to keep a person for that. Most 500 head of cattle, lots. And if all you're doing is raising cattle, you're not going to have a small herd. But that also means you're trusting God with the best. Normally, that's the one you want to breed. Saying, give me your best, I trust you. Anything else? All right. 26 through 30. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when an ox or sheep or goat is born, it shall remain 7 days with its mother. And from the 8th day on, it shall be acceptable as a food offering to the Lord. But you shall not kill an ox or sheep or her young in 1 day. And when you sacrifice the sacrifice of thanksgiving to the Lord, you shall sacrifice it so that you may be accepted. It shall be eaten on the same day. You shall leave none of it until the morning of the Lord. I think this is one of those things you just don't eat people. At least, yeah, let a little bit. And don't kill a baby and its mama at the same time. That's just. What you thinking, Melissa? I see your face.
Thinking the significance between that and circumcision for both 8 days.
Mm-hmm. There's, even with all of our medical technology today, we still deal with SIDS, sudden infant deaths. There's just infants that just die. We don't know why. The infant mortality rate in the United States is the lowest it's ever been in human history, just about. Period. But some of that was because if a child or a young animal is going to die, it often happens. You know, the chances that they survive after the first week are astronomically. So I think there's a pragmatic side to it. They do the circumcision on the 8th day because one, the baby's got to live long enough to build up some antibodies to be able to recover from the surgery. Of course, now today they almost second, third day.
Yeah, that's all alarm, you're not in the hospital very long, they make sure that's taken care of for you.
We're gonna have it done, better do it before you leave. And then they give you, of all the things, they were very clear with, here are the instructions on how to care for this.
With Jake, I was in and had one at Lutheran and got as far as Sparky Mart and was sitting in the back of the first time on, forgot all that stuff in the house. All the like little wrap, the eyeball, so, oh, it's terrible color. And like this motion were all over your face. Give it up. Dude, actually, it worked out better. In the pharmacy, my dad did a dentist on this square gauze, and he squared a little thing on, stick it in there, he didn't have to wrap it and peel it on.
Yeah. Sometimes it's about the pragmatics of keeping people safe. Sometimes the laws are pragmatics of making sure that we keep things appearing to go in the right direction. And sometimes, like this paragraph, it's just pure God saying, "Oh, still care for the world." They're, just because these are sacrificial animals, just because you're going to eat it, doesn't mean you can treat it as if it's not worth it. God still cares. He doesn't want that anything. I've always wondered if prior to the flood, before God said that we could eat animals, and prior to being kicked out of the Garden of Eden, is there some kind of fruit or a vegetable that tasted as good as a snake? I would like a good steak. And that truly is a. And I'd have to think that God in his infinite wisdom had given us something far better than that. But I don't know what it is. I'm yet to, I don't care what they say, the Impossible Whopper is not a Whopper. The imitation chicken is not chicken. Let's finish the paragraph, or the chapter. 31 through 33. So, you shall keep my commandments and do them. I am the Lord. And you shall not profane my holy name, that I may be sanctified among the people of Israel. I am the Lord who sanctifies you, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God, and I am the Lord. That is his God. Hey, God, is one of the things that I remember being told early on. I don't remember who, it had to have been one of the Sunday school teachers. They said, as Christians, we should live our lives in such a way that people are jealous of us and want what we have. Because we are blessed. We are blessed people, and we should live as a blessed people. Too often in our world today, we see people who are blessed and we tend to be jealous of them and we tend to want to tear them down and we tend to want to make sure that they know that they're no better than the rest of us. That's what we do with our celebrities, and everyone we put it up on pedestal, right? That's what we tend to do. But I think what God is saying is live your life in my blessings so that the world looks at you and they want this relationship, because I want everybody to be a part of this. But it's got to start with you. It starts with the priests, and then it goes down to the Levites, and then it goes to the people of Israel, and the people of Israel are meant to be a nation of priests to the world. So live your life in a way that the rest of the world wants what you have, not that they get mad at you. There's a key difference, right? We all probably know people who born into a wealthy family and you just hate them for it. We all also probably know people who are born into the wealthy family and you wouldn't know that they're any different. Don't let it go to their head. My best friend in high school, stupidly talented. Like basketball, was starting basketball player for the sophomore, junior, and senior year. Played football, he was a starting wide receiver, he was on the track team, he was the lead in the high school musical, he was top 10 in class. Just on the outside, as someone who was always middle of the road across the board, there were times where if I didn't know it was Andrew, I would just be angry. You know what I'm saying? But Andrew didn't ever use those as things to hold against me or anybody else. Andrew was one of those people who was friends with every single clique of people. He hung out with the nerds, he hung out with the jocks, he hung out with the smart kids. He was with he played trumpet, was in the band, and he sang in the choir. He never used the fact that he was blessed as something to say he was better than others. And consequently, everybody liked him. We should live our blessings in such a way that the world looks at us and says, oh, no, I really want to be here. I'm still, why are they that way? Can I be a part of that? Unfortunately, as we know throughout the Testament, and we know from human history, most of the time we lose our blessings as club to say, ha, look what I've got you. And the Israelites do it over and over and over. We are the children of Abraham. You're not. All the way into the New Testament, right? But that's not what God wants. Any other thoughts on 21 and 22? You want to try to go 23? We get into the kind of a little bit of a retelling, but let's just keep going until we get our time. Got another 10 minutes. 23, 1 and 2. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, these are the appointed feasts of the Lord that you shall proclaim as holy convocations. They are my appointed feasts.
Monumental
Festivals. That door is hard. Only goes one. For the record, we're going to go through these. They were celebrated every new once every 4 weeks. There are 7 feasts and festivals. We throw that in. That's now we're up to 19 feasts. This averages once every 3 weeks. They were throwing a party. Yes.
Are we barbecuing?
We're partying. 19 of them. Can you imagine how much different it would be if we actually built in once every 3 weeks or so? We just got to get together and have a party.
Christmas every 3 weeks.
And Easter or Christmas every 3 weeks. You went to learn your.
Right, have to really have your.
The priests are the ones doing the cooking, and the Levites are the ones doing the cleaning.
You show up and eat, I guess.
It'd probably be more like, pitching, spring cover ditch. Sure. Now, a couple of them, two of them will be long ones. Passover and Feast of Tabernacles. Not only did God want them to be a blessed people, He wanted them to enjoy the life. How many times have we looked at a Christian and wondered, do they enjoy anything in life? I had a friend who, it was almost a month or so before he found out what I did. He's like, you're not like most Christians. You didn't apparently have the stick inserted when you became a Christian. Just because God has given us all these rules, right after that, He's telling us, don't get so stuck in the rules that you fail to enjoy the life that I'm giving. That's a message we all need to hear. Any other thoughts? I just had to accentuate that. I've always appreciated it. Why in the world he's talking about the Feast of Festivus in Leviticus, where he just gave us this whole big group of laws? Well, it's on purpose. Don't get so stuck in the minutiae that you forget what this is all about. Sabbath, verse 3, 6 days shall your work be done, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath, a solemn rest, the vacation. You shall do no work, it is a Sabbath to the Lord, and all your dwelling places. Preach this sermon, I'm sure you guys have heard it. Sabbath is a reminder that our value is not found in what we do, but what we are. You're God's children. That is enough. Because if we work 7 days a week, it'd be all about what we produce, what we do. Fourth through 8, Passover. These are the appointed feasts of the Lord, the holy convocations, which you shall claim at the time appointed for it. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight, is the Lord's Passover. On the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to the Lord. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work. You shall present a food offering to the Lord for 7 days. On the seventh day is a holy convocation. You shall not do any work. 7-day barbecue, Gary. For 7 days, the barbecue pit's going non-stop. Yeah, chef. Well, there's a bunch of Levites, they agree. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? She said it all weighed 500 pounds. But what we don't realize is how much work they did the rest of the time. I think we got it all a little easy.
It's unleavened bread.
Unleavened bread. But you've eaten good unleavened bread. You guys came to one of theirs. At first,
It's not yeast, right?
yeah,
So it's
it's a little more dense.
yeah, but it's yeast, but it's up.
Oh, yeah. I can officially say, and I can already hear her saying it, isn't it so good that you feel bad after eating the yeasty bread? Now that I've all but cut it out, makes me, I love the taste. My body no longer likes it. But actually, unleavened bread or dense bread can bother me up. Because wheat's not bad for you, it's just some of the other things.
I need sugar to activate yeast.
Yeast needs sugar to activate. Up. Keep going. 9 through 14. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land that I give you and reap its harvest, you shall bring the sheaves of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. And he shall wave the sheaves before the Lord, so that you may be accepted. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. And on the day when you wave the sheaf, you shall offer a male lamb, a year old, without blemish, as a burnt offering to the Lord. And the grain offering with it shall be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, food offering to the Lord with a pleasing aroma. And the drink offering with it shall be of wine, a fourth of a hin. And you shall eat neither bread nor grain, parched or fresh, until the same day, until you have brought the offering to your God. It is a statute forever throughout your generations and all your lands. So big festival in March, April, before planting. We don't have another big one until you get ready for the first harvest. After the first harvest, you have a one-day festival. Just to remember that God's the one who gives you the harvest. And before you get yourself so caught up in the work of this, go to God and have a barbecue. It also says, don't eat the weeds, don't eat of the harvest until you've given God thanks first. Which is why most of the Judeo-Christian world praise and blessing before we eat. Just that reminder to say, God, even what we have is a gift. That. Any thoughts? Feast of Weeks, 15 through 22. You shall count 7 full weeks from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of wheat of the wave offering. You shall count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. Then you shall present a grain offering of new grain to the Lord. You shall bring from your dwelling place 2 loaves of bread to be weighed, made with 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour, and they shall be baked with leaven as first fruits to the Lord. And you shall present with the bread 7 lambs, a year old, without blemish, and 1 bull from the herd, 2 rams. They shall be burnt offerings to the Lord, their grain offering and their drink offering, food offering that with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And you shall offer 1 male goat for a sin offering, and 2 male lambs, a year old, as a sacrifice and peace offering. And the priest shall wave them with the bread of the first fruits as a wave offering before the Lord. With the 2 lambs, they shall be holy to the Lord for the priest. And you shall make a proclamation on the same day. You shall hold a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work. It is a statute forever in all your dwelling places throughout your generations. And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, nor shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord. But, in case you didn't catch this, for the lazy person, God says there's exactly 7 weeks to do harvest. Get it done. So you can have the Feast of Trumpets, which is next. We have a 7-day barbecue again after we've done 7 weeks. Work. Just God. For those people who are a little thick and don't get it, God builds in rhythms. Follow my feasts and festivals, I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to make sure you get the work done in the time that needs to be done. Keep going. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe a day of solemn rest, a memorial proclaimed with a blast of trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work, and you shall present a food offering to the Lord. Blow the trumpet, the harvest is over, it's time to stop. And don't harvest everything to the edge, because we should leave some for those who need it, who don't be built. Once the trumpet blows, you clock out. You're done. And God will take care of everything else. Any other thoughts? We'll do one more section. 26 through 32. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, now on the 10th day of this 7th month is the Day of Atonement. It shall be for you a time of holy convocation, and you shall afflict yourselves and present a food offering to the Lord. And you shall not do any work on that very day, for it is a day of atonement to make atonement for you before the Lord your God. For whoever is not afflicted on that very day shall be cut off from his people. And whoever does any work on that very day, that person I will destroy from amongst his people. You shall not do any work. It is a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwelling places. It shall be to you the Sabbath of solemn rest, and you shall afflict yourselves on the 9th day of the month, beginning at evening, from evening to evening, you shall keep your Sabbath.
Okay, serious, you're not gonna be teaching the whole day while you're resting, and a lot of resting, because you're just sitting around and gathering.
So this one, the Day of Atonement is a little bit as Christians, we kind of do some of this with the season of Lent. It says, afflict yourself. This is the day of introspection. That you've spent 7 weeks of working hard to get the harvest. It's time to take a day and stop doing the physical work and do the internal spiritual. This is a day of saying, okay, is my heart? Am I in the right mentality? But the other side of that is there were essentially 5 things you were allowed to do in the Sabbath: sleep, sustenance, worship, those things that had to be done to deal with, like you had to feed the animal, basics, and sex. That was it. Everything else was just fellowship and have a day to just eat. It's a day to take long naps. It's a day to just rest. It's a day to be with family and be with friends. It's a day to not be worried about the work because God will take care of you. This one particular one, the Day of Atonement, was a day to take that rest, but also to think through, to take stock of your life, to make sure that you were in the right attitude, the right mentality, and you hadn't just done the hard work, the outside work, but you also put it inside. So at least once a year, everyone is meant to do that hard injury we've been talking about for the last 3 months or so. Any other thoughts? Next week we'll pick up with the Feast of Foods at 23:30. Any final thoughts before we pray? And let's pray. Lord, may we never forget that we were the ones who stepped away from you. We were the ones who brought sin and guilt into this world. But you have always been working ever since that moment to make us right with you and to bring us back into relationship with you and to bless us. Lord, may we never take for granted this. And may we truly live lives that praise you. And Lord, when the world looks at us, may they see you and not what we have. In Jesus' name. They're with us here. Sometimes we lose it for the minute. We'll see you guys next Thursday. Yeah.